Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is the 18th of May 2022, and we'll be discussing the following during the course of our show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the lack of religious freedom whatsoever in our not so friendly neighborhood, India. And we will be talking about this in context of different issues that concern the religious minorities, whether it be the Muslims, whether it be Christians, whether it be the Sikhs. In its latest event, we all remember how Indian court had asked the Muslims not to go and pray in one of the temples, but because some of the relics had been found in that mosque. So now the Indian Supreme Court has overturned this local court ban to ban the large Muslim gatherings in a high profile mosque in North India, and this has happened after a survey team said that it had found relics of the Hindu god Shiva and other Hindu symbols there. Is this deliberate? Is this a continuation? Why target Muslims and other religious minorities? Why create a country that was so called a pluralistic and one of the largest democracies in the world? This is going to be our leading segment. Then our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the updates as far as the crisis in Ukraine is concerned. We have entered the 84th day of this crisis between the two countries. Where is it all leading to, whether it be countries entering the NATO alliance, whether it be Russia and Ukraine, both citing gains in this crisis? Will peace talks have any chance whatsoever in the days to come? This is going to be our second segment. Then we'll be talking about the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who has launched a new anti-polio campaign by administering polio drops to children. He said, and I quote, "We have launched a new anti-polio campaign with a renewed zeal and focus. There is a complete synergy of thought and action amongst the provinces and other stakeholders to eradicate polio. A polio-free Pakistan is our national goal." This is going to be our third story, and the final story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns a woman who was separated from her family during the violence at the time of partition. She has recently been reunited with her brothers at the Kartarpur corridor. She was an infant when she lied on the dead body of her mother, who was killed by the local violent mobs, and now, after years of searching, she has finally found her family through the Kartarpur corridor, and they have met finally. This is going to be our last story. Let's come with our first segment today, and that concerns the lack of religious freedom as far as India is concerned, and the denial of right to the Muslim community to pray in their mosques for reasons that they are trying to pin to Hinduism, and that the places where the mosques were present in the past belonged to Hindu temples and were present where Hindu temples had been constructed. That raises a lot of questions, but of course we'll be talking about that in detail. Let's watch this report first of all.
The marginalization of Indian Muslims exacerbated under BJP rule owing to discriminatory policies and state-sponsored oppression by Hindutva regime, sparking fears of further marginalization of Muslims under the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Indian state's assault on holy sites and religious sensitivities of Muslims continue unabated. A court in North India banned large prayer gatherings in the historic Gyanvapi Mosque after a survey team allegedly found Hindu relics there. India's Supreme Court overturned a local court order to ban large Muslim prayer gatherings in a high-profile mosque in an interim order which emphasized that Muslims' right to prayer should not be disturbed. Earlier, in their bid to humiliate and assert Hindu supremacy, schools and colleges in India's southern state of Karnataka barred entry for Muslim girls and women who wear the hijab that created ripples across the country. As a direct assault on their core religious rights, Indian government is creating barriers for hijab-wearing Muslim women fighting their way into educational institutions and jobs. Under the garb of so-called delimitation, the representation of Muslims in the redesignated constituencies in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir had been reduced to their disadvantage. Since Modi came to power in 2014, Hindu mobs have lynched scores of Muslims suspected of transporting cows or consuming beef, and thus India stands at brink of Rohingya-type ethnic cleansing of Indian Muslims.
Now, to discuss the issue, we've been joined by Kaswar, who's a renowned journalist. Kaswar Sahab, thank you very much to have joined us and to have come to the studios. Kaswar Sahab, when you look at the religious minorities and how they have been treated, or that they are being treated in the last few years, every single week we hear of something new that happens either to the Muslims or to the Christians or to the Sikhs or to the Dalits. Is this deliberate?
I think it's deliberate, and it will be continued. And what important thing that I can tell you is, under Modi, I don't think India need enemies around the globe. I don't think. And the way we are going to discuss the Hinduism, the way they treat their subcaste, I mean the Shudra and other things as well. How can you expect Hindus, and especially fascists like Modi, how can they treat their minorities as well? As you rightly pointed out, the way they treat the Muslim, the way they treat the Christians as well, it is deliberate. It has been continuing for the long time, and Modi is doing it deliberately. And you know, what happened to the Muslims minority a couple of the month back, and hijab pro and
in
Kartarpur as well. They even this thing even brought bad names to the country as well. But Modi doesn't care, and this is what we call it a BJP and the fascist parties over there ruling over there. I think under Modi and one-liner, they don't need the world to look at them. They don't need enemies. And I want to give message to the Indian friends as well. For God's sake, get rid of this fascist Modi, because he has brought bad name to the Hindus, to the Indias as well since 1947. I think they don't need any enemy. And another message for the minorities as well, they have to stand up. And my message is to for the Muslims, Christians, and other minorities as well. They have to stand up, and we are very lucky. The Muslims in Pakistan as well, we are very lucky, and we appreciate Qazi Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and other visionary leaders as well.
That we have a country where the Muslims of the subcontinent can practice their religion as they want.
Exactly.
And where the minorities, such as the Hindus and the Sikhs, are also given the right to practice their religion as they want.
And the way in 17 or I think the 18 states there in India, they are striving hard for the independence as well. You know very well.
There are so many independence movements that are going on because of that.
This integration of so-called world's biggest democratic, I don't believe it, but so-called this integration on the card, and the way the religious minorities had stood up, I think they will be able to create a number of Pakistans as well.
All right, let's talk about the Gyanvapi Mosque. Now, this is of course located in Varanasi, which is Hinduism's most revered city. Nevertheless, it's a mosque, and now all of a sudden they find relics of the Hindu god.
That is laughable.
Yes.
That is laughable. All of a sudden they got to know that the water tank was inscribed with the picture of Shiv Sena, and they were one of their guard, the most sacred guard, according to them. But it is laughable. It is actually the continuation, deliberate continuation to suppress their, I think, minorities, especially the Muslims, and Muslims will not get back right now. I'm telling you, mark my word. They have the way they have stand up behind the little girl over a hijab row. I think they have woken up, and mark my word, you will see a number of Pakistan will be created in most, I think in 17 states of so-called biggest democratic country in 17 states. This integration is already on the card.
But let's talk about the Muslims and their persecution inside of India, and let's talk about the mosque. We've just seen this incident of the mosque in Varanasi, but even before that, we all remember what happened in 2019 at the Babri Mosque, where it was told to be demolished in 2019 by the Supreme Court, and because also it was built apparently where Hindu Lord Ram had been born, and this created a huge, not only mistrust but also so many, aggravations between the communities, between the Indians that used to live together in harmony in the past. This is also a deliberate attempt, Kaswar Saab, in my point of view, to deliberately push all the minorities on one side and to put India in the future, as in the present, as a Hindu country and not a pluralistic country. Do the people of India, you've just said that in the beginning, that the people of India need to understand that and need to, in the next elections, not vote for a party like the BJP or Narendra Modi. But will this eventually happen? Because a lot of mindsets have been turned in the last few years.
Well, I think first of all, it's a laughable argument made by the Hindu majorities that the mosque was a temple first of all. Secondly, the government of Modi has given a big and loud message, tried to convey a message to their minorities that whenever we want, we can suppress any of the minority here, be it Hindu, be it Muslims or even Christian as well. It's a big and loud message. But when we talk about the verdict of the apex court, I think it is unusual, but it was, according to my opinion, it must be taken under the under the pressure of from international organizations working for the minority rights as well. But one thing is very, very clear, that Hindus will again vote for Modi's BJP, and basically I'm sorry to say about my comments I'm going to make, that Hindus actually they are extremists. And Modi, what Modi has done during last 8 to 9 years, he just exploited their extremism. And now I think it's a big and loud message either to the Christians, either to the Parsis and the Muslims particularly, that you have no place left here. Whenever we want, we can come hard on you people. And this is all about India, the so-called, the biggest democracy. It's a sham democracy in the world. So I think the verdict might be given under the pressure from the world's leading organization working for the human rights as well.
There are so many reports, of course, talking about the human rights violations within India, whether it be the United Nations, whether it be Genocide Watch, that says that the genocide is underway in India as we speak because of the way the religious minorities, including the Muslims, are being treated. Then there are the reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, that also talk about the human rights abuses that are going on, not only in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but also beyond that within India itself. When you look at the Indian Supreme Court's decision now that it has taken that the Muslims can go back and do their prayers at the Gyanvapi Mosque in Varanasi, which is of course a home state of Narendra Modi. Looking back at its decision in 2019 about the Babri Mosque, do you feel they will change? This is something I want to understand. Has their mindset changed?
No.
Klasra Sahab, of the judiciary, I'm not talking of the government, of the judiciary between 2019 and 2022, have they understood that what they took as decision in 2019 maybe wasn't right, and that is why they have overturned the decision of the local court as far as this mosque and the permission given to Muslims to pray there is concerned?
I think credit must be given to the World Organization and Americans as well, and they have been watching closely since they rebuild their bond with India as well. I will definitely appreciate the European Union as well. They have been watching India, but it could be, mark my word, it could be and it will be the repetition of Babri Mosque, God forbid. Okay. Muslims knew it very well, and the fascist, the BJP regime has done great job to suppress them, not only the Muslims but also the other minorities as well. For the time being, it is the verdict of Indian's apex court could be taken as a fresh breeze by the Muslims, but just for the time
but
being.
I think Klasra Sahab, you remember in 2019 when the decision was taken to construct a temple at the site of the Babri Mosque, and the Babri Mosque was demolished. There were riots that occurred and almost 2,000 people were killed as a result of that. Is that also one of the reasons why the Indian Supreme Court this time overruled over the earlier decision by the court, by the lower court, as to allow the Muslims to pray in this mosque?
It can be a factor. It can be one of the factors, but I don't think in this case, I think the international community, the pressure from international community, and also what they have done in the Kashmir, the international community have done, we have seen a number of reports as well, which badly criticize the Modi regime as well. I think could be a pressure from Americans, Europeans and other organizations.
Do you feel that this pressure is working now?
Yeah, exactly, behind this verdict. But I think it could be a repetition of Babri Mosque as well, because the Hindu primarily it is an extremist, and Modi's regime has
But
exploited
you know,
the Hindu
Klasra Sahab, even
sentiment.
if the Hindu mindset was not extremist, it has been now made into an extremist mindset, especially in India by the Narendra Modi government, under the Modi government.
Under
And
Modi
we
regime.
see the way, A, the Muslims are not allowed to eat beef properly, B, not allowed to practice their prayers and their religion as they want freely, C, not allowed to live a life of their choice freely, and this is not just restricted to Muslims,
Even
but
they
also
can
goes
use
to Christians and
headscarf as
Dalits.
well. Even they can't do what to talk about this regime where the majority of the minorities, the majority of the Muslims, the women cannot wear headscarf as well.
And
When
you know, just
exactly,
this issue
what
at
do you expect?
Karnataka of the students who cannot go to the same education institutions where they used to go with their veils in the past, and now
Exactly,
all
in
of
the
a sudden it is decided that they cannot no longer
That is
go
why I
with the
told
veils.
you, under Modi, India doesn't need enemies across the world. Modi has emerged as one of the biggest, killer of Indian society as well. And let me tell you, Barsab, India is no more a secular state, no more a secular. It is actually an extremist state, and what can you expect?
But Klasra Sahab, why aren't restrictions put or sanctions put on India because of the way they are treating their minorities? If this had happened in any other country,
Yes.
The results would have been very different for their government. But in
Appreciate
India,
that.
they are let loose. They can do whatever they want.
First of all, they are actually a biggest market for the West and Americans as well. Biggest market. And secondly, you have raised a good point. If it was happened in any other country, I mean, the country must have until now, faced with the sanctions as well. But it's the biggest market, and secondly, appreciate their diplomacy as well. They counter every move with their diplomacy, and their diplomats. We must appreciate them, and this is what they have done so far. So, but on the other hand, reality is that in a country where the government is Hindus, and even the Shudra and other subcastes cannot live freely,
Dalits.
what to expect of this fascist regime, and what to talk about the other minorities, including the Muslims, the Parsis, and then Christian as well. Even the Hindus, subcaste, the lower caste, they cannot live freely in a state which claims to be a secular state and which is being ruled by the Hindus majority. They cannot live freely. What to talk about the minorities as well. And when we discuss the decision by the past court, it is welcoming, but it is just for the time being. And I believe,
Do you feel the reaction is going to be strong from the Hindu community as well?
I believe it could be the repetition of Babri Mosque as well.
That
and
was
very
disastrous.
soon.
The repercussions were
You
disastrous.
can expect it.
All right.
Very soon.
But then what should the people in India do? Those people who have lived for generations and for tens of years in a very normal environment with all the other religions, how should they react now? I understand that there's a huge majority of Hindus whose mindset has been completely changed by this current Modi government. But for those who still remain sane, can they make a change in the society?
They must strive for the change for the regime, and I think in next election, if they mean it, and some of my friends, when we talk about them, we talk about the situation there in India, they believe the Modi, the butcher of Gujarat, has done great damage to the secular state as well. But if they mean it, the only option left is they must change for strife. For my Hindus friends, it's a message for them. But on the other hand, as I told you earlier, that 16 and 70 states in India, they are already striving for independence. And I think very soon they will be able to.
We're also seeing the Khalistan movement gain momentum as well.
Khalistan movement is there in Uttar Pradesh. There are in Assam as well, and where how can you forget what happened to their lost former army chief? And it was a move from those fighters who have been striving for a long time for the independence from fascist Hindu state.
All right.
So I think the only viable solution for them is to strive for change through election, and they have to get rid of this Moshi's fascist
But you know,
regime.
Klasra
But I think it is not an easy task.
I totally understand it's not an easy task, and I also feel that the West needs to exert more pressure as far as India is concerned, its attitude towards its minorities is concerned. And another thing that I wanted to discuss with you is the fact that whenever the Hindus see a Muslim talk about the atrocities that they are committing within India, they say, if you are not happy, go to Pakistan. These are families that have been living in India for generations, that have not come to Pakistan at the time of independence, that decided to stay in India, and they are now being said that they are Pakistanis. If they are not unhappy, they should go to Pakistan.
Yes, they will go to Pakistan, but not the Pakistan where we are living right now, where we are, a part of a special transmission right now. But they will go to their own part. They are striving for what, and I am telling you, 17, the creation of 17 Pakistan is on the card. They are in Assam, Uttar Pradesh, and other states. The freedom fighters are really close to what they have been dreaming for a long time. And I mark my word, they will, as you told us, as you just described, that to go to Pakistan is a message of any Hindu Indian to a Muslim Indian. They will definitely go to Pakistan, but they will, that Pakistan will not the Pakistan we are living now, but it could be a new and nascent democracy that will emerge very soon on the map of world, very soon, mark my word. And there could be created, 10 to 17
but
Pakistan.
Klasra, where does that leave the Muslims of India? The Muslims in India are much more than the Muslims in Pakistan. They need to have a voice, they need to have their rights, just like the Christians, just like the Sikhs, just like the Dalits. They all need to have their rights. India has always claimed itself to be the largest democracy in the world. It has also claimed itself to be a pluralistic society. That is what Narendra Modi Sahab said when he was in the United States of America some time back. Don't you feel the people, irrespective of whether they afterwards decide to go somewhere else, but at this moment as we speak, don't you feel they have rights?
Exactly, they have the right, and they deserve to be treated as the Modi's regime treat the first class Hindus as well. They deserve the right, but sadly it is not happening over there, and that is the way they are fighting for their independent states as well. And another aspect of and the fact that the Americans and the West are not coming hard on India is, it could be because India is one of the major importers of arms, ammunition, and it looks towards Americans and the Western countries as well. So that is perhaps the fact.
And also to counter China, of course, also India is also being used as a pawn to counter China in their Indo-Pacific strategy, that is of the United States of America. Thank you very much, Kaswar Klasra Sahab, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the religious intolerance that is happening in India as we speak. And this is just one of the examples of this mosque in Varanasi, where the Muslims were not even allowed to pray because they had found apparently some relics of their Hindu lords. And all of a sudden they decide that this needs to change and the Muslims cannot pray here. And we have seen the example of Babri Mosque in 2019, and we saw the riots at that time as well. Just hope and just pray, as I do, and I'm sure so all of the other Muslims do as well, that this situation does not exacerbate, does not aggravate. The Muslims, whether it be in Pakistan or India or elsewhere, need to have their rights and need to be respected. I think that is extremely important. Thank you very much, Klasra Sahab, to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the Ukraine conflict. Today is the 84th day of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. A lot has happened, a lot of sides have been taken, and of course NATO is playing an important role in all of this, and other countries are joining NATO now. Where is all of this leading, whether economically, politically or otherwise? More in the following report, then we'll return with our guest.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict is sending ripple effects across the world owing to complex interdependence of the world economic order. The 11th week of the Russian invasion of Ukraine saw Kiev's forces mount a counter-offensive. Ukrainian troops have recaptured towns to the north and east of the country's second city, Kharkiv, in eastern Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that the West had triggered a global economic crisis and a wave of ruinous inflation by imposing on Russia the most severe sanctions in recent history over the conflict in Ukraine. Russia sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine on 24th of February in a special military operation, prompting the United States and its allies to impose sweeping sanctions on Russia and the Russian elite, measures termed by Kremlin as a declaration of an economic war. The United Nations Human Rights Council has passed a resolution by a strong majority setting up an investigation into allegations of rights abuses by Russian troops in parts of Ukraine formerly under their control. According to United Nations Refugee Agency, more than 6 million refugees have fled Ukraine since Russia's invasion began on 24th of February. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has stated that Russia is the most direct threat to the international order. In order to avoid massive disruption of global economy, famine, destabilization and humanitarian crisis, dialogue and diplomacy must be accorded primacy.
Dr. Usman Chohan, political economist, joins us online. Dr. Chohan, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always a pleasure to have you in our show. Dr. Chohan, let's talk economy first of all. Wheat, a lot of that is stuck in Ukraine as we speak. A lot of countries are not being supplied the necessary wheat. Then if we look at this situation economically, Europe will be committing economic suicide by seeking to phase out Russian energy supplies. This is what Vladimir Putin says, and there are so many other things that we'll discuss after that. But what do you foresee as far as the wheat crisis is concerned, and B, what Vladimir Putin has just said as far as economic suicide is concerned by Europe?
Yes, I think that the wheat concern is a significant one. I would say oil is the biggest thing, and then second is wheat. Especially for developing countries, wheat importation is a very important factor because both countries, Ukraine and Russia, were very significant suppliers of wheat to the world markets. So for developing countries that do not produce it but do consume it, such as Egypt, for example, or Bangladesh, it is a very scary scenario. Egypt, for example, is now considering buying wheat from Pakistan, as well as from other countries that produce wheat. So everybody is trying to find alternate things for food security, and they're having a tough time bidding for it in the international markets because not all producers want to sell anything. They also have to consider local prices and keeping the supply consistent domestically. In Pakistan, for example, we have to cater to our domestic needs before we're ready to export it.
Of course.
So the concern is therefore that there won't be enough supply on the world markets, and there are significant developing countries, well, significant in population, such as Bangladesh and Egypt, which are going to have a very hard time. And the Ukrainian foreign minister has said that he does take it seriously, the responsibility that Ukraine has to address this, but given the conditions, how are they to be able to do it? So, for example, the port of Odessa, which is the critical supply line, to get them onto the ships to the world markets, there's about 25 million tons of wheat estimated. 25 million tons of wheat at the port that cannot be delivered anywhere. And from what we are observing, Odessa may be a battleground. God forbid, I hope things resolve quickly and peacefully. But if Odessa becomes a battleground, what will happen to that wheat that is waiting at the port? So these are the concerns with wheat. And as for your second point about economic suicide, there is a validity to the point that there was for a long time, let's say the last 2.5 decades, an interdependency among Western Europe and Russia, created through mutual investment, which included energy supplies from the Russian export side, and that is in a big jeopardy. Finding alternate sources in the short and medium term is very difficult for any country, alternate routes for the pipelines that have been invested in over time. So the price of commodities overall is severely impacted by this. So the consideration of a suicide, at least in the short term and medium term, is a scary one.
All right. Dr. Chohan, let's also talk about global food security, and we also know that Anthony Blinken is attending a meeting along with senior officials to discuss global food security, and this is of course under the auspices of the United Nations. Do you feel some concrete decisions will come out of it? Do you feel the dependence that a lot of countries, as you just said, in the West, in the European Union have as far as food is concerned, as far as oil and energy and gas gas are concerned, could the alternate solutions be found? I understand, as you've also said, that short and medium term solutions might work, but they are not solutions that will be tangible. So, of course, long term solutions, how long will it take for countries in the West to find durable solutions?
You're asking an excellent question by focusing on the duration of the question at hand. And the duration can be adjusted based on how quickly things are resolved amicably and peacefully, hopefully. So having a summit on this is good because it signals that it's a priority point, and most countries are sending important delegations to this summit, so they're emphasizing the impact of it. But in terms of actions on the ground, in terms of addressing the world supply, whether it is for the consumables such as wheat that we eat, but also consumables such as petroleum in our cars and whatnot, addressing the short term, not everybody is on board. There isn't an international consensus, and ideally a conference like this would be the forum to have greater consensus, but it isn't clear to me that all countries are on the same page. You basically have a lot of bystanders, people who are in fact benefiting from a higher oil price. Oil exporting countries, for example, they are not interested in lowering the price. In fact, given that the deficit was created in COVID in terms of the oil price sinking so much, they're certainly making it back now. And so I don't observe anybody, oil producing OPEC or OPEC plus, interested in adjusting oil prices. So food prices, oil prices, and the general elements of core inflation are not being addressed in a uniform fashion, but that is because global politics right now is particularly charged, and not everybody is eager to take sides, and some people actually benefit from such chaos and violence.
Now, speaking of benefiting from this chaos and violence, of course, militarily, a lot of countries are benefiting from it by supplying weaponry to not only Ukraine, but also the adjoining states. But at the same time, let's talk about economy and food security now, and also economic assistance. The US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says during a speech in Brussels that the country, that is Ukraine, needs large-scale economic assistance. Do you feel at the same time that Russia needs assistance as well, or do you feel that it can sustain for a certain amount of months or some time the effects of this crisis that is engulfing the region?
This is a very interesting and very complicated question, because what was assumed about Russia's ability to withstand going into the conflict, so in February, mid to late February, was that they had $600 billion worth of reserves, diversified not just in dollars. They had gold, they had yuan, they had euro, they had so much. So it was quite a war chest going into it. But given the architecture of sanctions that was applied, at least half of that was made unavailable to them. And so the Russian central bank had to take interesting policy measures. For example, it immediately hiked the interest rate to 20% and then stopped people from dealing in the ruble into foreign currencies. And other measures were taken, realizing that not all of the war chest of 600 billion would be available. As far as Ukraine goes, the claim by Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, that Ukraine needs assistance is correct, because the World Bank now estimates that the Ukrainian economy is going to shrink by 45%. So it will be half the size of what it was prior to the conflict. That is catastrophic. And obviously it's catastrophic. You see the images of their cities being leveled and destroyed and people fleeing and whatnot. So, but this has ripple effects for all of us. For example, in Poland, the capital, Warsaw, grew by 17% in terms of, so it reminds me of the influx of refugees in Pakistan back in the day from Afghanistan. So these sorts of ripple effects come out, and that is why Pakistan has behaved responsibly as a caring and responsible nation, arguing for a peaceful resolution of this conflict with the greater world interest in mind. We should always be advocating for responsible peace in the world.
True. You talk of responsible peace, you also talk of ripple effects. Pakistan has seen that with the Afghan influx of migrants. We are also now seeing in the European countries the influx of migrants from Ukraine. How long will the European Union sustain the influx of migrants and the effects of the crisis in Ukraine?
A very interesting question, because it is difficult to speak at the EU level, since all the member countries don't seem to be on the same page. Although the overall tendency is to be sympathetic towards the plight of Ukrainians, which is very reasonable given their suffering, but not all countries are on the same page. So, for example, the immediate neighbors, such as Poland, they have invested a lot and expanded their budget for accommodating refugees massively, in a way that Pakistan also did back in the day. And Germany and other countries sympathetic towards the plight are also advocating for a push. And as far as sustaining it, it seems that they have the capacity to, at least until the medium term, do it. For countries immediately close like Poland, they may even want to invest for the long run, which is saying that if Ukrainians don't go back, they may simply naturalize them in the long run. It seems to be the case. But for countries that have also a strong interest in maintaining close ties to Russia, perhaps Serbia or countries like that, they are they're not part of the EU. Serbia is not part of the EU, but still they're saying that there should be a bit of balance, not just all pro-Ukraine. Bulgaria, as a EU member, has a slightly different stance. Turkey, as a NATO member, has a slightly different stance on things. So it is difficult to speak with unanimity, but the tendency of the EU is to help out as much as possible, given what is at stake for the EU as a whole.
Now, we were talking about food in the beginning. Let's also talk about fast food and McDonald's that is closing down in Russia after 30 years. A lot of Russians lined up to get their last burgers and fries before the chain closes down. Do you feel that is going to have some kind of an effect, closing down of such chains for the US and your European Union, and also for Russia?
Yes, Russia was a fairly large market for many multinationals. I'm speaking of hundreds of multinationals, but it wasn't so large for any of them that it would immediately sink their income statements. So the way it worked is you can look at all of the sectors, from banking, such as JP Morgan, all the way to the fast-moving consumer goods, retail, all the way down to the discretionary, such as McDonald's, and they all, based on the moral leanings or the corporate board leanings that it pushed them to do that, they withdrew and they just simply wrote it off. As far as their effect of it, many of them have actually used it as a pretense to justify any other losses. For example, inflation in general being high, not just because of this conflict, but for example, supply chains being clumsy or fragile around the world. They're using this as a write-off and then they'll move on. And sometimes companies that invest in emerging markets simply have to be prepared for this sort of thing. But I believe that this was a particularly severe and unseen thing. And so companies just simply have to write it off, the multinationals, and move on. And as far as the Russian domestic market, it's actually surprising that many of the things that Russian consumers would have purchased from such multinationals, let's say, soft drinks, burgers, etc., they are Russian equivalent brands, and their logos are a bit uncannily similar to the multinationals, and they seem to be surviving happily on the knockoffs, let's say.
All right. Let's talk of energy as well. Now, the European Commission is apparently expected to lay down a plan on how to wean the region of Russian hydrocarbons by the year 2027. Will that happen eventually by 2027? Do you expect it to happen in the ways it is predicted?
This is a difficult question because the transition to renewables post-COVID actually stuttered a little bit, because the energy costs were going high, supply chains were confused around the world. So there is a robust and solid basis for moving to renewables in general everywhere, including here in Pakistan. But the scale at which it was being done appeared to be, given the shock of COVID and post-COVID, a little bit too ambitious, because there is still a dependency on non-renewable resources, coal, oil, etc. Now there is also a political motivation for a very significant market, EU being 450 million people, that they would wean themselves off in just 5 years of that, finding alternate routes, finding alternate technologies and expanding them is quite difficult. For example, solar is a major renewable energy, but there are only two countries with significant solar exposure. One is Spain, which is a sunny country. The other is Germany. Germany is not a sunny country, but they invested so much in subsidies going back 2 decades. But not all countries in Europe are sunny. Just as an example, that they won't be able to draw upon these renewable things. And to then find alternate routes depends on what they're taking in terms of oil and natural gas from the other sources around the world. But not all producing, let's say, non-renewable producing countries also have good have a good image in the European eyes. So it really might be a question of picking what from where and at what price, which involves a lot of disruption. So that's why it's not clear that they might be able to do it.
On the one hand, we've got more and more countries willing to join the NATO alliance that includes Finland and Sweden that have officially put on their candidacy for joining NATO. On the other hand, we have European energy giants that continue to buy Russian gas, as the EU guidelines kind of allow them to do so without breaching sanctions. Is this, I mean, there is a certain dichotomy in the, because NATO is the main factor due to which Russia started this conflict, because it did not want Ukraine to be a member of the NATO alliance. This NATO going eastwards at the same time, EU nations continuing to buy gas from Russia. Where is all of this going? I mean, I don't understand. On the one hand, you try to put sanctions. On the other hand, you continue to buy Russian gas. There is a need. I understand that, and you've just explained that as well. But to which extent is the European Union, the West, or the NATO will allow other countries to kind of be flexible as far as buying from Russia is concerned?
You're absolutely right. You've basically pierced the veil of the rhetoric, which seems very one-sided. The rhetoric is very sympathetic towards one country, but the practice, the economic contracts, and all of those things are not so one-sided. It seems that many entities beneath the supranational, so let's go to corporations, individuals, and that are not so one-sided, and therefore you see what you call dichotomy, and let's say it's a cognitive dissonance because you're saying that this is a terrible thing, but you're still willing to do business. It seems like it's not quite clear-cut, and that's where oftentimes economic rationale may supersede political rhetoric, and that is why you have the same competing force writ large around the world, where you may make a moral case one way, but you're still doing business with those people. And that actually predates this conflict. It's been an observation about many conflicts that have happened since World War II, where you do business and yet you're saying that this is terrible. And if that is true, either you tone down the rhetoric or you walk the talk, I believe. So I recognize what you're trying to point out in terms of inconsistencies, where individual agents can profit from things, but still they'll repeat the rhetoric, which seems to be very high and mighty. So I recognize what you're saying.
I would really like to sit down with you one day and understand this rhetoric and where this rhetoric is leading the West and the European Union towards under the current situation with the food and the energy crisis that is lingering over the West. Thank you so very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, political economist, who have joined us and to have talked to us about the repercussions and what is happening as far as politics or economy of the region is concerned. We are at the 84th day, on the 84th day of this crisis between Russia and Ukraine that is engulfing more and more regions as we speak. Also, EU's top diplomat Joseph Borrell says that if numbers and reports are true, the Russian army has suffered impressive losses, while at the same time Britain says Russia has lost a third of its forces in Ukraine, but Mariupol in Ukraine seems to fall as Ukraine declares an end to the steelworks operation. A lot of developments, a lot of different sites that are being taken. Only time will tell what the actual reality to the issue is, and that will come to light in the next couple of days. Let's come to our last stories very quickly. The first concerns our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab, who has called for collective efforts to eradicate polio. He launched a new anti-polio campaign by administering anti-polio drops for children, also tweeted on that account, also talked about the importance of polio eradication for a country like Pakistan. And of course, he talked about how important it is for the provinces and the stakeholders to eradicate polio, and that a polio-free Pakistan is the national goal of Pakistan. Collective efforts, I think, as Shehbaz Sharif Saab has pointed out, are extremely important as far as eradicating diseases such as crippling diseases such as polio are concerned from the country. And the National Task Force on Polio Eradication in Islamabad is something, a right measure that has been taken in this regard. Let's hope that tangible results come and come sooner than we expect as far as this is concerned. And then let's come to our final story, ladies and gentlemen, and we'd like to end on a heartening, on a warm note. Now, a woman who was lost in 1947 in violence, of course, while India and Pakistan were being created, has now finally met her Sikh brothers at Kartarpur. She was separated from her family during the partition, and at the time of the partition she was an infant who was lying on the dead body of her mother, killed by the local violent mob. Then one Muhammad Iqbal and his wife adopted the baby, raised her as their own daughter. Then she took residence at the village of Varikatiyan in Sheikhupura district. She was not in the beginning told that she was not the real daughter of her parents, but then of course then she was told quite late, and then the people started to look out for the real family of Mumtaz Bibi, and then they found through social media that her family still was alive, and through the Kartarpur corridor the Sikh family of Mumtaz Bibi came and they met, and this family reunion took place after decades. It is very heartwarming, and it goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way. When you want to find the truth, when you want to find your family, when you want to stick to a cause and you have the will, there is always a way to find a solution to that. We wish Mumtaz Bibi all the very best, and we hope that her reunion with her family was a heartwarming one. We wish her all the very best. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's Newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe, follow the SOPs, and prevent COVID-19 from resurging further. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.